Minister Morlock, thank you so much. And as we heard from the Minister, the peaceful political revolution in the GDR started right here in 1989, the Nicholas Church, I think. So do go and check that out, because revolutions can happen in many different ways. And we're encouraging you here to think big thoughts, to reinvent, and also to listen to some revolutionaries. Our keynote speaker, our first keynote speaker, embodies the whole idea of being a revolutionary and capturing the public imagination. We've heard in Leipzig about teams of people coming together to work. But what the public really responds to and what gets us going about change sometimes is just a person out there, a visionary. And we have one such person about to address us, Bertrand Piccard, best known, of course, for going around the world in a hot air balloon, now trying to do the same feat with a solar-powered plane. I don't know if any of you caught sight of it out there in the exhibition, a most beautiful vehicle, creature, I should call it, with the most extraordinary wingspan. We're going to hear all about Mr. Piccard's plans to introduce the world to a new way of transport. It's called the Solar Impulse Project. I would like you to put your hands together for a Renaissance man, Bertrand Piccard.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I don't believe we need to make a very long speech to realize that we have a great number of challenges for our future. It's not only the financial and economical crisis that everybody is talking about these days. No, it's also the energy, it's the environment, it's fighting poverty. It is also desperately trying to get a better governance on this planet. And how are we going to solve these challenges? Some people believe that we need new ideas. It's not enough. New ideas, that's extremely easy to have. If we all close our eyes here for 1 minute, we will all come back with a lot of new ideas. This is not the issue. The issue is how to go from the idea to the reality, how to go from the dream and the vision to implementation. And for this, I believe that we really have to understand that what we have to learn is not to get new ideas, but much more to get rid of the common assumptions, to get rid of the certainties, to get rid of the habits that keep us prisoners of old ways to think and old ways to act. This is innovation. This is pioneering spirit. And this is what we need if we want to invent a better future. There has been a lot of these common assumptions that have kept us prisoners of the present instead of pushing us in the future. For hundreds of years, it was proven to be impossible to fly until somebody could fly. The Everest mountain was there for millions of years. Nobody had climbed on top, so everybody thought it was impossible until somebody did it. Walking on the moon, only science fiction until 1969. And I personally remember a very high-level scientist who explained me why it would always be impossible to fly on muscular power. He had calculated that the diameter of the muscles of the arm for a human being is too small in comparison to the muscle of the bird to carry a human body in the air. Well, the problem for him is that the pilot who crossed the British Channel on a muscular-powered airplane used his legs and not his arms. And the legs have a big enough diameter to carry the human body in the air. What does it show? It shows that each time we have convictions, each time we have absolute certainties, we need to change the angle of view in order to find alternative solutions. A nice way to explain about pioneering spirit is the metaphor of ballooning. In a balloon, you are pushed by the wind. You are dependent of the direction and the speed of the wind. And if you want to go in one direction and the wind does not push you there, you will not go either. But what do you learn as a balloonist? you learn that the atmosphere is made out of several different layers of wind, which all have a different direction. So basically, if you want to change your trajectory, you just have to change your altitude in order to get a better wind. And I think it is exactly what we should learn to do in life. In life, we have visions, we have dreams, we have hopes, we have targets. But very often, the winds of life, the situations, the problems, don't allow us to reach that direction. That's why I deeply believe that in life, if we want to innovate, to create, to be pioneers, we have to change our altitude in the winds of life. That means psychologically, philosophically, spiritually, in order to grab other influences, other visions of the world that will necessarily reorient our trajectory. The problem is that just now, that's a nice metaphor, maybe quite poetic, but still useless. How do we change altitude? How do we really manage to become a pioneer? Well, just understand a little bit better how a balloon works. If you want to change altitude in a balloon, you have to drop ballast overboard. And here you will climb to a higher level. The ballast in a balloon, that's water, sand, food reserves, old equipment you don't need anymore. And when you throw this overboard, you climb higher. Now it starts to be more practical. Because in life, and especially in politics, especially in economy and finance, if we want to change altitude, if we want new trajectory, we have to drop ballast. And we have a lot of ballast in our world. It is called certainties, safety, common assumptions, convictions, exclamation marks, habits, paradigms, dogmas. All these things that usually we want to hold in our hands very strongly when something goes bad because we believe it will reinforce us. It's not true. It doesn't reinforce us. It just makes us heavier. So if we want to invent a better future, we need to identify our certainties and our conviction, throw them overboard, and that means try to do the opposite. I don't mean to say that the opposite of what we already believe will always be better. No. What I mean to say is that if we have a conviction, and simultaneously we can envisage exactly the opposite, we don't have anymore just one way to think or to react. We have thousands of ways to think and react in between. This is possible in politics. We can very well take ideas from the left and ideas from the right in order to make our own political program. It's the same for religion, although it's these days a little bit more dangerous maybe. We can belong to a religion, but at the same time understand the faith and the belief of others, integrate it in our own belief in order to have more tolerance and also, of course, to open and broaden our spiritual understanding of life. We can do it for economy, for education of children, for finance, of course, for technology. Why should we believe that we have to continue what the past has brought to us instead of making some paradigm shifts in innovation? If we manage to think like this, if we manage to be a little bit more a balloonist in our pioneering spirit, what will be the result? The future will not be anymore one straight line going in one dimension in one single direction. No. The future in front of us will be made of all the possible lines, going in all the possible directions, at all the possible altitudes in 3 dimensions. And what will be pioneering spirit and innovation? It will just be when we allow ourselves to move up and down along this vertical axis, explore all the different altitudes, which means all the different ways to think, all the different ways to behave, all the different ways to react, until we find the altitude, that means the way of thinking, that pushes us in the direction we wish to reach. It's not easy. We need advisors, but mainly advisors who have different ideas than us, otherwise it's useless. We need sometimes friends, family members, psychiatrists, psychotherapy. We need, for balloons, to have weathermen. The weathermen are the ones who calculate the direction of the wind in 3 dimensions and help the pilot to move up and down to follow this 3-dimensional grid, each altitude having another direction. But I have to say that sometimes it's very paradoxal. When I was with Brian Jones, flying around the world non-stop in 1999, there was a moment after 4 days of flight where the weatherman told us, you have to keep an altitude of 8,000 meters and a speed of 60 kilometers per hour. Well, 60 kilometers per hour, if you want to fly 45,000 kilometers, you don't need a computer to see it doesn't work. So we disobeyed. We moved up and down to find better speed. And at 9,000 meters altitude, we found a little jet stream blowing 120 kilometers per hour. And we were so proud that I took the sat phone, I called the weatherman in the mission control room, and I say, hey guys, don't you think we're good pilots up there? We fly twice the speed you predicted. And the answer was brutal. They told me, we never asked you to fly so fast. And before I could say anything, they told me, open your gas valve, move down by 1,000 meters to slow down. And I started to argue. I said, I'm not going to do that. We are in a hurry. We don't have enough gas in the balloon to make holidays over every country we overfly. Let us fly fast. And they told me, you understood nothing up there or what? I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you have a low pressure system on your left side. So if you move too fast, for 12 hours it will be brilliant. High speed, good direction. In 12 hours you will have reached the front of the low pressure system and you won't go east around the world anymore. You will move counterclockwise around that low pressure system and you will end up in the North Pole. And then they asked me a question that changed my life. They asked me, hey, you, the good pilot up there, what do you really want? You want to go very fast in the wrong direction or slowly in the good direction? And here you understand how important it is to have good weathermen, not just for ballooning, but everywhere in life, especially for governance of this planet. Because what do we see now in our world? We see our world that burns 1 million tons of oil every hour without counting gas and coal. A world that is changing the climate, destroying biodiversity, leaving incredibly high public deficit for the next generation who is never going to be able to pay it back. And what's the result for us today on the short term? It's brilliant. We have mobility. We have money. We have energy. We have safety. We have comfort. But for how long? It is obvious that such an unsustainable way of living is pushing us very, very fast into a wrong direction. And we know it. We all know it because it's impossible to open a newspaper without saying that. Why don't we change? Why don't we do something? Well, basically because long-term vision leaves a lot of space for doubts and fears, and we hate that. That means that nobody dares to make the first step, waiting for the others to do it, and at the end nobody moves. That's why we need incentives from government, in order to oblige everybody to move at the same time to make the first step. Otherwise, people won't move. I tell you one thing, if we succeeded around the world, in our balloon, it is just because we accepted to slow down. We accepted to lose our little jet stream. And I tell you that sometimes it's difficult. When we were over the Pacific Ocean, there was 12,000 kilometers of water. The speed was reduced to 25 kilometers per hour. We knew that without another good jet stream, we would ditch in 10-meter waves and wait for a week for ships to rescue us. And we started to be afraid. But you know, fear is not something bad. Fear is the moment where you disconnect the autopilot in your head, where you are not anymore just driving as usual, just doing the same business as usual, always more of the same. It's the moment where suddenly you allow yourself to be more conscious, more aware that you have something to change. And we change everything. We've changed the altitude, the flight plan. We threw everything overboard to be lighter. We didn't overfly Northern America as planned. We overflew Mexico, the Caribbean, and so on. And at the end, we succeeded. 20 days in the air, 45,000 kilometers. The longest flight ever in the history of aviation with no engine. No engine needed. But if I show you this picture, it's to show you how much gas we have left in the last 2 fuel tanks. You see the best on the right side. You see this bottle with a little bit of frost? That's the liquid propane remaining. We took off with 3.7 tons of liquid propane. We landed with 40 kilos. What does it mean? It means that it was the last moment to land. The flight was unsustainable. If the winds had been slower on the Atlantic, if we hadn't found a 234 kilometer per hour jet stream, we would have ditched instead of making a successful landing. On that day, I made a promise to myself. I made the promise that the next time I would fly around the world, it would be with no fuel at all. It was still a dream, but it became a real vision when the capsule of my balloon was brought officially to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum in Washington, together with the capsule of Apollo 11, airplane of Charles Lindbergh, the Wright brothers, Chuck Yeager, and so on. And on that day, of course, I was proud. But on the other hand, I started to ask to myself, there are 11 million people coming in that museum every year to see the past. What are they going to see in the future? In one generation, what will be in the museums? Well, there will be these old milestones aircraft of the past, but there will be a lot of other things. There will be everything we take today for granted. There will be our cars. There will be our airplanes. There will be our heating systems. There will be our air cons, our computers. There will be everything that today we use because we believe it's normal, but it will be prohibited in the future because it pollutes too much, or it's just going to be unaffordable because of the energy that it requires. And there will be millions of people who will be laughing because they will understand that for 100 years, an entire society has based everything on a limited quantity of fossil energy with a price that could only go up, when there is already today so much renewable energy possibilities with an unlimited quantity and therefore a price that can only go down. Basic economical rules that we forget when we get in high positions in this world. I made the promise that there would be a solar-powered airplane in that museum that would show that already today we have the technologies and we have the innovation needed to fly around the world with no fuel. And I think it fits quite well with the challenges of the 21st century. In the 20th century, humankind has conquered the world. Now it's conquered. It's done. People have gone on the moon. That's done. The future is about new impossible things, new paradigm shifts. And I believe the most interesting one, because it's the most difficult one, is to get rid of our dependency on fossil energy. Why that? Of course for nature, of course for the environment, because we know it's important. But it's not enough. Absolutely not enough. For 40 or 50 years, the green parties have showed us this type of pictures of pollution. It did not change the world, because the answers given by the green parties very often were wrong. The answers were reduce mobility, reduce transport, reduce industry, reduce comfort, and nobody wants that. So nothing moved. And in Copenhagen, where I was with the Swiss delegation, it was obvious that people were just presenting the problem of climate change and the cost to solve it, instead of understanding that the origin of climate change is the dependency on fossil energy, and that there are so many solutions that are completely profitable to earn money and at the same time reduce climate change. This is why that type of pictures, I believe, are much more interesting. The price of the oil going up, the price of all the energy going up, uranium. Look at this curve. Quite a nice curve. Look at this one. You know what this is? The shares of General Motors on the stock exchange market. Price of energy, shares of General Motors. It is clear that if the car industry was obliged to reduce the fuel consumption, in 5 years they would do it. And if General Motors had been obliged to do it 5 years ago, they would not have gone bankrupt this year or last year. And they defend themselves because they say, oh no, it's only about the financial crisis. Wrong. The biggest loss of General Motors is in 2007, when there was absolutely no economical crisis. It was just the year where the price of the oil was at the highest, $147 a barrel. This is why all technologies, the lack of innovation, the lack of pioneering spirit is dangerous, extremely dangerous. Not just because it makes a couple of short circuits, no, because it ruins the potential of our society. And the result is poverty, unemployed people. So of course we can say, oh, this is on the other side of the world, who cares, when we live in Europe. Can you imagine that this is in France? These are houses built by homeless and unemployed people, and poverty is more and more present in the rich countries, destroying the purchase power, destroying the growth, destroying our potential. Well, we have other means to produce energy and to make very clean transport. There are solar power, photovoltaic. There is thermal solar power, which works already extremely well. And Deutsche Bank is also involved in the funding of this type of projects in Africa. Insulation of buildings. Very easily, you can get more return on investment when you insulate your building or your house than putting your money on the stock exchange market. You get between 12 and 20% if you return on investment if you insulate your house. You can produce energy with wind, with wood, with biomass, with geothermy. You can have hybrid engines that keep the same comfort, the same speed, the same safety, but with the half of fuel consumption. This is a picture I like. It's maybe not yet the most efficient building, but it's built in Bahrain, a country exporting gas, and they know more than anybody else that the period of cheap fossil energy is over. We have to diversify. How can we speak about that? How can we really speak of innovation with a way to create enthusiasm to the people and not fear and doubt? People are fed up of hearing bad news. Because at the end, when they see millions of tons of oil in the Gulf of Mexico, they don't care too much of spilling a little bit of oil in the wasted water in their city. People are fed up. People need to have enthusiasm, need to have dream, and need to have hope. And this is what we try to achieve with the Solar Impulse project. If we can fly around the world in a solar-powered airplane with no fuel, nobody will be able to tell at the end that it's impossible to do the same for cars, for heating systems, for air cons, for computers, for electrical lamps, and so on. So, of course, there were already, and you know it, some solar-powered airplanes in the past. It has always remained an anecdote because they had no storage capability. They did not have any batteries. So basically, they could fly only in the full sunshine, and each time the night was coming, they had to land. So they showed the limits of renewable energy much more than the potential. What we want to do is to fly day and night, to solve that paradox of capturing solar energy with solar photovoltaic cells and simultaneously run the electrical engines and store the energy in the batteries in order to be able to spend the night in the air on the batteries. An advisor of us, Alan Coquini in the US, could do it with a 4-meter wingspan model, flying 48 hours in a row, remote control, no pilot. Quite nice, but if you want to capture the imagination of the people, I believe you have to put a human being in. So if you want to go from a remote control airplane to an airplane capable of carrying a passenger or pilot, it's not 4 meters anymore in wingspan, it is 64-meter wingspan, in order to have the surface for the solar cells and the aerodynamic efficiency, and fly also slow enough in order to be able to fly with so little energy. Why that? Because if you count all the losses between the solar cell and the prop, you get for 1 square meter roughly the half of an electrical light bulb, 30 watts. With 200 square meters, as we have the same energy than 200 small light bulbs. That means a Christmas tree. So the challenge for our team, for our engineers, is to build an airplane that is light enough with new materials, efficient enough in terms of energy, to fly with a pilot on board around the world, day and night, with the same fuel consumption than a Christmas tree. The test flight, have been done. We have this airplane. The goal will be to fly around the world in 2013, but the first big goal of this year is to fly day and night. The airplane has to take off on its own, without being pulled in the air, just on its own power. Climb to 8,500 meters, 27,000 feet. At the same time, loading the batteries in order to arrive at maximum altitude with full batteries. And there, the pilot will have just one goal, a single goal: reach the next sunrise before the batteries are empty. And this is the challenge of our world. If the airplane is too heavy, if the pilot doesn't fly stable, if the technologies are not optimal, we will not make it through the night and we will crash before sunrise. And in our world, it's the same. If we don't implement the innovations we have, the technologies we have today, we'll never make it to the next generation without a major disaster. And don't believe the people who tell you we don't have the innovation today. We have to wait to have better technology. It is wrong. We have today the technologies we need to get rid of at least 50% of our dependency on fossil energy. So you see that this airplane flying day and night without fuel is just a symbol. A little bit like on this picture here. This is a painting from Magritte. It's written, "This is not a pipe. This is not an airplane." Or at least not only an airplane. It's a symbol of what innovation and pioneering spirit can bring in our world. We're not going to transport 200 people in a solar-powered airplane next year, this is for sure, and probably even in 20 years. But when Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927 with 2,000 pounds of gasoline on board, and nobody else than himself, because the payload was taken for the gasoline, everybody thought, oh, if we want to fly across the Atlantic, we have to make a pilot license. And 25 years later, there were 200 passengers in every airplane. So the goal of Solar Impulse, the goal of speeches like the one I'm doing today, the goal of making interviews, making events, press conferences around Solar Impulse is just to get more people in the team. Not the technical team, no, but more people who understand that they can implement in their daily life the same spirit and the same technologies than the one we put in this airplane. If we fly around the world and enough people start to be enthusiastic about using new technologies to save energy, then it's going to be a success. So pioneering spirit, a little bit like on this picture here, a frozen window with a rising sun on the other side. Pioneering spirit is like this. We have to go beyond the obvious, on the other side of the ice. This is pioneering spirit. Now, of course, you will always hear people who will tell you it's impossible. Don't blame them. They just don't have the potential to do more than what they do. Try to help them to see beyond the obvious. Try to help them to have more pioneering spirit, more creativity. Otherwise, we'll never move forward in our future. So you see that it's something that is maybe more emotional than completely intellectual and rational. That's why, as a conclusion, I'd like to show you a little film, 5 minutes, of what we have done today during the last 6 years of Solar Impulse. The rest you can see on solarimpulse.com. But through this film, you will see what we have done during 6 years. And maybe while you're watching these pictures, you can ask to yourself, what would you like to do? Which is the ballast you would like to throw overboard? Which is the altitude that you would like to reach in order to obtain the targets, the objectives, the visions that you would like to fulfill. Now you have 5 minutes to deal with yourself. Can you please run the music and the film?